Week one is in the books, at least for the most part, and we've got some big old takeaways for NFL DFS. We're going to break those down right now, going game by game and letting you know what you need to know from week one for NFL DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Here to join me to break things down is Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor of numberFire. Brandon, week one, basically in the books. How you doing?
Good. Learned a lot. Learned that I didn't know everything, which I already knew. But I think this has to be the toughest week one to recap. I mean, week ones always take forever, so sorry in advance. They take a long time because we learn a lot about what teams actually want to do when the games matter. But with the lack of, off-season reporting, training camp videos and clips, and this guy's running with the ones. And I mean, there was some of that, but not enough to feel great about every situation. So, I mean, this, last night recapping these games was, it was some tough homework.
Yeah, for sure, because you also don't know which players may be getting eased in, given that there was no preseason. We could see some players, not on full workload. So you have to ask yourself the question, is what I saw in week one representative of what we'll see going forward? And that's always a really tough question to really know. So I think that's going to be one of the keys to this week, but there were some pretty actionable takeaways. So if you are new to the podcast, the way we do this is we go game by game, recap it, and we'll discuss various takeaways. And at the end, a lot of times we'll play a game called Name That Salary. And Name That Salary is just, what would you pay for that player given what you now know their role to be? So we're going to play Name That Salary throughout the day today. Kind of gives you a gauge on where we're at on players. And if the salary I name is higher than what their actual salary is, it probably means they're going to be good DFS plays for the next week. If it's lower, probably means we're going to be lower than consensus on those players. Let's dive into the Thursday night game to kick things off here. Brandon, that was the Chiefs at the Texans, and it does not seem like the Chiefs missed a beat. And Clyde Edwards-Helaire, shockingly, not shocking actually, going to be involved in this offense. What did you see there?
Yeah, the Chiefs are back, so that's good. It's one thing we can bank on, hopefully. They won that opener 34-20. They did so with big outings from two players in particular, Sammy Watkins and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'll start with the passing offense, then talk about CEH because I just always tend to prefer that. But Watkins led the team with 9 targets, which worked out to 28% of the target share. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Demarcus Robinson each had 6, which was 19% of the targets. Watkins also led in air yard share at 40%. But it is worth noting that Mahomes was credited for just 2 downfield passes, according to numberFire's database, which at numberFire we consider a deep pass 16 yards or more downfield. Didn't complete either of the 2. Those deep looks went to Demarcus Robinson and Tyreek Hill. Mahomes also looked to Watkins 3 times in the red zone. Mahomes had 8 red zone attempts, so it was really good usage for Sammy Watkins. I'm definitely not going to downgrade Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill by any means, but as someone who likes Sammy Watkins, this was an encouraging game for me. It was also very encouraging for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who had 10 red zone carries and 25 overall rushing attempts. A lot of people on Twitter, because it was an island game opening up the season, were nitpicking. Just 2 targets for Edwards-Helaire, no catches, but he did run 17 pass routes according to Pro Football Focus. Outsnapped Darrell Williams 67% to 33%. So I'm very inclined to love that workload in this offense. The Chiefs are in the main slate in an afternoon game against the Chargers next week. Digging into Houston now, also on the main slate next week as they face the Ravens. So kind of staring 0-2 in the face. This script that we saw on Thursday in week 1 might be somewhat similar to what we see in week 2 when they trailed. I know that there were a lot of jokes that they established the run late, and I get it. But they were 6th in one-score pass-to-run ratio in week 1. But I think the real storyline here is just Will Fuller. He had 10 targets, which was 32% of the looks, 129 air yards, which was 50%. 3 of 8 downfield targets, and he really should have a grasp on an elite workload while he's healthy. Emphasis on that part for Will Fuller, which we know is always problematic for him. Brandon Cooks was second on the team with 5 targets, which was just 16% despite playing through a quad injury. So I think that's a little bit promising. He had 2 deep targets of his own. Again, if he's healthy, he's going to be interesting. Randall Cobb had just 3 targets, but did play 78% of the snaps compared to 80% for Fuller and 53% for Brandon Cooks. Not really interested in Randall Cobb, but the snaps are nice. And then in the backfield, David Johnson, 4 targets, 11 carries, despite an 81% snap rate. Had a red zone carry as well. Just not a great game environment for DJ to dominate touches, but 81% of the snaps for someone who runs routes. He had 32. He can get red zone work. He can just get some downfield targets as well, which is rare for a running back. So I like that for David Johnson. I think really Watson, Fuller, Johnson, they can all kind of be stacked together. They're going to draw me in pretty much each week because the ceiling is high. But I want to go back to that Chiefs offense and ask you to name that salary for Clyde Edwards-Helaire next week against the Chargers as, I believe, 8.5-point favorites.
So what you're getting in Clyde Edwards-Helaire is you're getting the early down back for a Patrick Mahomes offense who we can reasonably project to get passing down work too, because like that's why they drafted him, is because he's so good in the passing game. And they're 8.5-point favorites, like you mentioned. It's not like a matchup we necessarily need to avoid. So, like in a vacuum, that role is worth like $8,700. I don't know if that's outrageous.
I mean, Dalvin Cook was 87. This week for week 1.
I think it's a pretty similar role, honestly, because it's a better offense.
Better offense. Maybe a little bit less of, although Dalvin Cook wasn't anything amazing, but 87, I would still roster Edwards-Helaire at 87. I don't think we'll have to. He is, look here, 8,000.
Yep. So
it sounds like you'll be heavy on Edwards-Helaire for week 2.
Where would you have been relative to 8,000? Are you higher than that?
I probably would have said 82. Okay. It's easy to say that in hindsight, but I think 8,000 was probably the low end, or just being realistic. So I like Edwards-Helaire. Are you worried about what he did at the goal line? Because I'm really not.
Nope.
You get those touches,
if you get that many touches and you have the possibility for passing down work in that offense, especially with the way they use their backs in the passing offense where they can get downfield targets, you don't need a touchdown to pay off. I know on FanDuel it's a very touchdown-centric site, but you don't need a touchdown to pay off if you get a good enough workload, and I think that that's within his range of outcomes. So I think 8,000 makes him – I don't know the other backs, I don't know the other matchups in the slate, but that's a cash game consideration for me, firmly in the cash game consideration.
Yeah, it's always tough because we don't know the slate by memory yet. I think Edwards-Helaire cash game probably trending that way at that salary.
All right. I also agree that Fuller and DJ arrows up, especially if Duke Johnson can't go next week. It's a bad matchup for DJ, so maybe you don't need him there. But it was really encouraging what he did on Thursday night. In case you missed it on Thursday, our weekly listener, the weekly listener league. Wow. Okay. Happy Monday is back for 2020. Joey Knish, 26, earned the win in this week's contest with a score of 183.4. They used Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams along with Lamar Jackson to get that win. As a result, they've won themselves a free numberFire premium subscription for the next year. If you want in on the Week 2 free play for your chance at numberFire Premium for a year, tune in to Thursday's preview podcast. My first game of this week is on Sunday. That's the Jets at the Bills, and it was the full Josh Allen experience here. He threw touchdowns, he ran a bunch, and he fumbled. That's just what Josh Allen does, but that does translate well to fantasy production, and it should continue to do so with how much he is rushing. He led the team with 14 rush attempts, and one of which was from the 2-yard line. Allen will face tougher matchups. The Jets are going to be a team we pick on quite a bit, but I think that the fantasy friendliness we saw from Josh Allen in the past is still going to be there this year. The running back snaps were pretty evenly split, but Zach Moss had the preferred role between the two. Snaps were 56 to 44% in favor of Devin Singletary, but The team ran 5 times inside the 10-yard line. Moss had 4 of those attempts. Allen had the other. Moss also had 4 targets, one of which was an end zone, or a target in the end zone, which he converted for a touchdown. So Singletary's volume is going to look okay, but it's going to be a lot of hollow volume. Between the two, I prefer Moss. The problem is neither guy is going to be a bell cow here, which is not ideal for DFS. So I'll need Moss to separate a bit more before I start to invest here for daily purposes, but it's pretty clear to me that Moss has the preferred role in the offense. Allen threw 46 times, but the targets were kind of spread out a bit. He threw 10 times to John Brown, 9 to Stephon Diggs, and 7 each to Cole Beasley and Singletary. Allen threw intermediate a bunch and had just 4 deep throws, but that was also, I think, that was kind of a league-wide thing this week where there weren't a lot of deep throws. 2 of those deep throws were to Smokey. Because John Brown and Allen have that holdover chemistry, I'm going to favor John Brown for now. That could change if Diggs starts to get more of that deep work. For the Jets, Le'Veon Bell left with a hamstring injury. Sam Darnold threw a pass behind Bell, and Le'Veon got banged up trying to come back to get that pass. He did stay in the game for a bit, but then was declared doubtful to return. Le'Veon left after the first drive of the third quarter. At the time of the injury, he had just 6 carries and 2 targets. Frank Gore had 2 carries and no targets, but I'm not going to be into Gore if Le'Veon misses time, but Le'Veon's role was not terrible before the injury. It was kind of similar to last year where it's a lot of hollow stuff, and like you can talk yourself into it, and as I did plenty of times last year, but like it was like it's kind of more of the same here. The problem with the backs is that the offense looked really bad. They're not fully healthy at wide receiver. The offensive line is totally rebuilt and needs to build that chemistry. But Darnold finished with negative 4.39 passing net expected points. He threw a very classic Jameis level pick. If you're new to the podcast, I call Sam Darnold Jameis Darnold because he just throws a lot of Jameis level picks. That may improve as the chemistry along the line gets better and the receivers get healthier, but like he's still Sam Darnold. He's still going to throw picks. Defenses facing him are still in play. That's just the way things are going to work with Sam Darnold until things change. As expected, Jamison Crowder dominated the targets. He had 13. Chris Herndon had 7, and he was the only other guy with more than 5. Crowder actually had 109 air yards, so it wasn't just bunny targets, and he did take a short one to the house. So that's interesting, and he could be in play as part of a bring-back stack when you load up on teams facing the Jets. I could see Herndon being similar, so that's interesting. You just kind of have to hope the Jets pace well enough to keep the game competitive, which they didn't really do today, but the Bills still threw, which is encouraging for Josh Allen. So I thought that was at least interesting for sure. Brandon, I want to talk to you about John Brown and Stephon Diggs. Both these guys got volume. We saw the Bills be decently pass heavy. So not going to ask Nate that salary, but like, where do you stand on those two after what we saw in week 1?
I made a few jokes about this game entering just kind of on Slack. And I said like Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs could be like the stack that kind of goes off. It didn't really work that way, but Josh Allen always can pile up fantasy points. And I also said Jamison Crowder 12 targets incoming. He had more than that. But yeah, I think.
Did you predict a 69-yard touchdown out of Jamison Crowder, who is averse to long plays and touchdowns?
Every touchdown I predict is for 69 yards. So
yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I think they're both going to be game-dependent options. They're never, ever going to touch a cash game lineup for me as far as unless I really see something shift here. But they have upside because Allen just doesn't take care of the football. He can fumble, he can sling it, he can run. So pairing one of 2 options really with a quarterback who can put up points like Josh Allen can is always going to be enticing. So I like Diggs. I like Brown. I think it's going to be hard to guess right, but what I might do is, build lineups with Diggs, who's probably going to have a higher salary, most weeks, and then maybe just duplicate that lineup and swap out Diggs for Brown.
Yeah, I think that's probably a smart way to play it because like it's going to be tough to predict, but I would favor Brown by a bit just because the holdover chemistry there, but it was encouraging to see the Bills throw as much as they did, so maybe that will make game environments for them a little bit better, and that's encouraging, and the Jets defense less encouraging. Let's move now to Seattle at Atlanta, and Brandon, they let Russ cook. What'd you see in this game?
Yeah, 4 touchdowns, 4 incompletions from Russ because he's very, very good. So continue to let him cook, please. And the targets, and this is fun, went to the 2 studs. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, each saw 8, which was about 24% of the targets. Each cleared 90 receiving yards. Metcalf scored. Metcalf also dominated the air yard share, 57% to 37% over Lockett. The downfield targets followed. Metcalf had 4, Lockett had 2. Nobody else got any. So I think we're probably going to look at about 50% of Russell Wilson's targets each week going to Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Obviously, it's not going to work out that evenly, but in general, you can kind of project them for something close to that. Again, we're going to have to guess right on who scores, or maybe they both do. You can probably stack both of them with Russ if their salaries kind of cannibalize one another and they stay a little bit more in the mid-range rather than creep up into the $7,000 range on FanDuel. One problem still might loom for Seattle, and that's red zone usage. David Moore had 2 red zone targets. Greg Olsen stole 1. Chris Carson had 2. So that's not particularly ideal. Carson overall had 6 targets, including 2 touchdowns on them, only 6 carries, which was 1 fewer than Carlos Hyde, because they did, again, let Russ cook. Carson, though, played 45% of the snaps compared to 34% for Hyde. I was in on Carson in week 1. I think I lucked out a little bit more because it's not quite what I expected here, but I am going to be kind of wary of Carson if he is around 50% of the snaps. They're not on the main slate next week. They host the Patriots. So I think we can get weird on a single game slate with Carson for sure. I don't think that's like egregious, but I do like the idea of another week to see how the Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde split fares. For the Falcons in the loss, Matt Ryan piled up stats. He had 450 yards and 54 attempts, just 2 touchdowns. But Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley, and Russell Gage each cleared 100 yards, and they each had nine catches on 12 targets, which is just pretty wild. Julio was the one who led in yards with 157, and air yards he had 188, which was 51% of the team's air yards. He had 5 of 8 downfield targets, didn't score, and got just 1 of 8 red zone targets. So, I mean, it's really, really hard to hate on that workload, but the red zone situation with Julio might still be a thing. I don't know. Ridley had both of the touchdowns despite a 3.4-yard average target depth. He had a single downfield target, but did get 3 of the 8 red zone looks. And then Russell Gage had 1 downfield target and 2 red zone targets. Gage played 71% of the snaps, which is definitely viable. Ridley, for comparison, was at 87%. I really love Ridley. I still have Julio. Ridley's he's going to be more affordable with his salary every single week. Russell Gage is going to be intriguing. He did have 7 first-half targets, which was 2 more than anybody else, so it wasn't just in the second half when they were pumping him. Todd Gurley scored, had 14 carries, 5 of which were in the red zone. Also 5 targets. In terms of adjusted opportunities, which is carries plus 2x targets, because the average running back target is twice as valuable in terms of average fantasy points than a carry. He had 24 adjusted opportunities, which is pretty decent. That's probably where I would expect Todd Gurley to be more often than not. Played 46% of the snaps. No other back, though, is really a factor. They're at the Cowboys next week, so I'll be interested in stacking them up. So my question to you is kind of name that salary for Julio and Ridley. If you don't want to name a salary, just kind of what did you see here in week 1 from those 2 specifically?
So I thought based on role that Julio was, this might be slanderous, like a little bit over-salaried for week 1. I used him in game backs, but like I preferred Devontae Adams straight up. And Devontae was lower salaried. But now that seeing this role for Julio and seeing how pass heavy they were and how much downfield work he was getting, I think that he's actually pretty appropriate around 8,000. So I'd say 8,000 for Julio. I love that game. Like, my goodness, this is going to be a fun game. Ridley, he was 68 or 66, I would say. I think. Confirming that role, even with the lack of downfield work, because we know that he can get downfield work. Like, I don't think that's going to be a thing for him. I would say 7,000 for him. For Russell Gage, 54. I feel very firm saying $5,400 for Russell Gage.
Well, combined across three, you were off by $300. Julio's 82,
Okay.
you said 8,000. Ridley's
Okay.
salary is 71, you said 7, I think.
Okay.
And then Russell Gage is 54.
He's the most $5,400 player who has ever existed.
That's very true.
I think that he's going to work for game stacks. I don't know if he's going to get enough deep work to I know he got a deep target, but he's not a guy who profiles as being some electric slate breaker, but for game stacks, he kind of works. So yeah. I don't want to actively get in on Russell Gage. I think that I'm going to more actively get in on Matt Ryan, Julio Jones, and Calvin Ridley, but I can do it in game stacks. What are you feeling with Todd Gurley after that usage? Because I'm pretty much status quo, which wasn't that high in to begin with. I think I had a couple shares, maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm status quo, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, I think I was going to say really no change in opinion, which was game stacks, which I had some this week. So I had some Todd Gurley, but I don't think Todd Gurley's going to trend toward being a cash game play. And really that's kind of the differentiation. You're either a cash game play or you're kind of a game stack, tournament option. And I don't think Gurley fits the cash game mold.
Yeah, for that game when I'm just going to be having everyone who is in it, who is anywhere tangentially in it, who has previously played for either team, and I can just get fake exposure to it, I'll be doing that. Gurley will work, but that's about it. Let's move to Chicago and Detroit. Mitchell Trubisky, the comeback win. He looked pretty bad for most of the game, but hey, comeback wins, baby. He finished with 4.36 passing net expected points. That's 0.12 per dropback, which is okay. He ran 4 times, which is not high enough for me to get excited. Trubisky also did this in a dome against a team that didn't have its top corner and then lost its second corner within the game. So I do not think this was a game that should change our view of Mitchell Trubisky at all. Trubisky did give volume to his good pass catchers, though. Allen Robinson had 9 targets, which is 25%, with 6 deep targets. That's great. Anthony Miller had 6 targets. 3 of those were deep. That's pretty in line with what we saw down the stretch last year. Miller, given that assuming his salary stays low, will be in play for tournaments. A-Rob is in play for all formats. Figures to be a high floor, high ceiling type option. I just don't tend to like the game environment for the Bears enough to go there, but his role is objectively very good. Jimmy Graham had 7 targets with 3 in the red zone. He will be 2020's version of Kyle Rudolph. If you don't get a tutty, he's not going to do anything for you, and that's not the kind of tight end I like to target. So the volume was fine. I'm not going to go there. David Montgomery got decent usage despite coming off this injury. He played 45% of the snaps, but he had 13 of 24 running back carries. If we count Cordell Patterson in that, which I would based on the way that they used him. We also saw Montgomery get 3 targets on 14 routes run. I'd expect his role to expand as he gets further removed from that injury. The upside isn't high enough where I'm trying to grab him before that time, but he'll be worth monitoring for sure. Adrian Peterson said when he signed at the Lions that he thought he'd get work, and he was right. He had 14 of 24 running back carries to go with 3 targets. He led in snap rate at 37%. It is a 3-way division in the backfield. For DFS, we want no part of that. It's clear that DeAndre Swift will get work in the passing game eventually. I feel bad for him with that drop touchdown. It's going to happen eventually. It's not going to happen yet. This is an easy backfield to avoid for now. Kenny Golladay was out, so hard to draw too many conclusions from the Lions' passing offense. It is noteworthy, though, that Matthew Stafford ran 5 times. That ties his highest total since 2016, and he averaged 2.5 rush attempts per game last year. So if Stafford is healthier, if that back is healthier, we could see him run more, which would help his upside for DFS, even if the team is kind of dumb. So I'm interested in that for sure. The targets were pretty much as you'd expect. 8 for Marvin Jones, 7 for Danny Amendola, 5 for TJ Hawkinson and DeAndre Swift. Jones and Amendola both had 2 deep targets. The air yards were pretty similar. Obviously, Jones the better DFS play if Golladay misses time, but Amendola would be an option. He got air yards, so I guess there's that. Hawkinson didn't really get deep work, but he did score a touchdown. I'm a bit more tepid on him than I was coming into the game, but it also wasn't a serious deviation from expectation there. Brandon, I want to go back to you on the Bears side of things. I said that I'm pretty even on Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller, guys who I considered, but I just don't value their offense enough to get super jacked. Are you feeling the same way about those two?
Yeah, it's tough. I like both of them as receivers. It's just really difficult whenever you don't really believe in a quarterback. I've kind of come to terms with receivers in DFS where if I don't want to stack you with your quarterback because I don't really believe in your quarterback, I don't really play you. Like I don't roster you. So sorry, Alan. I know we have a back and forth, but same with Anthony. We're on a three-way message. So
Sure. Good save there.
yeah, I think I'm not out on them. It's going to have to be the right game script.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that we're ever out on them. It's just like they don't really fit our process that well.
And Robinson's his salary is always like around 7,000, which is super tough when I hate your quarterback.
Right. In game environment matters so much at wide receiver, like more so than running. Game environment matters at running back too, but it matters more at wide receiver. And like, it's hard to be in a great game environment if your quarterback isn't that good. Like if they were playing the Lions indoors and I wasn't super inspired to go there, I don't know.
And Trubisky's guaranteed to throw 3 touchdowns against the Lions.
Yeah, I mean that's just bankable production that you got there. Trends, baby. But I would like to see more out of Mitchell in favorable situations because that didn't really move the needle for me too much on Sunday. Let's move to the other NFC North game between the Packers and the Vikings. Devontae Adams, baby. We love it. Love to see it. 17 targets. He's a beast.
Yep. 17 targets, which was 42% of the targets for Green Bay. 3 of them were downfield. 3 of them were in the red zone. 163 air yards, which was more than half. That's just, I mean, that's stud workload. And I think if any receiver gets a 30% target share for the full season, Adams has to be the odds-on favorite to do that. 2 other players here had 6 targets to tie for second on the team, Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Aaron Jones. Valdes-Scantling had 3 deep targets, 129 air yards, which is definitely relevant, but did have an egregious drop, which I don't care about drops, but I think Aaron Rodgers cares about drops and will probably, I'm always a little bit, worried whenever Aaron Rodgers is involved because I never know what he's thinking. But I mean, overall, the workload was decent, 54% of the snaps, but, that's not really anything I want to chase. Aaron Jones, interesting, also played 54% of the team snaps with a strong workload, 16 carries, 3 in the red zone, 6 targets, 4 in the red zone, which is tied for the NFL lead. He landed up out wide or in the slot on 4 snaps, according to Pro Football Focus, which is always a good thing to see. Last year, I was typically out on Aaron Jones just because I didn't really believe in the workload and he needed touchdown opportunities, which I always hate to chase. But I think I'm higher on Jones after seeing this. The carries after Jones were just 7 for Jamal Williams, 3 for Tyler Ervin, and 2 for A.J. Dillon. The snaps there, 40% for Williams, 18 for Ervin, and 6% for Dillon. They host the Lions in week 2 as 6-point favorites. The total was about 46.5 when I looked. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. I don't think we need to talk about Devontae too much, but I'll be interested to hear your thoughts on Aaron Jones. As for the Vikings, Minnesota ran just 49 plays, which was the fewest of any team in week 1, and that's never fun. 25 total targets came from Kirk Cousins, who was efficient in terms of numberFire's metrics, which that helps. And what also helps is that only one player had more than 16% of the targets. That was predictably Adam Thielen. He had 8 targets for 32% of the team's looks. 5 of those were deep targets. Thielen wound up with 110 yards, 2 touchdowns, while also accounting for 53.6% of the team's air yards. So really elite workload. It's probably not going to stick, but I think the arrow is up for me on Thielen. I didn't really go there in week 1. Just didn't really draw my attention, but I think I'll probably change that a bit. As for Dalvin Cook, a little bit of a curious game. Scored twice, just 2 targets. Alexander Madison had 4. Cook had 3 red zone carries. Madison had 2. Cook was at a 61% snap rate, which is never the type of rate I want to pay a top salary for, but I typically do it with Dalvin Cook because I believe in the offense and I believe in his talent. Madison played 39% of the snaps. I'm probably still willing to overlook week 1 for Cook. I mean, he scored twice. I'm not really saying it was terrible, but Dalvin Cook's always hard to pin down because his salary is such of a workhorse back, but the workload isn't always there, and Alexander Mattison kind of is no joke. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Aaron Jones and, honestly, Dalvin Cook. Minnesota's at the Colts next week.
So I fully agree with your assessment of Aaron Jones, mostly because of the targets. Like 6 targets is a lot more than I expected, because if you look last year, after Devontae Adams returned and the games where Jamal Williams was healthy, Jones had just 10% of the team's targets. And like, that's not a great number. He averaged 3.2 targets per game in the games that he played with Williams and Adams. 20.5 adjusted opportunities. And he got 28 adjusted opportunities in this one, partly because the game script is good, but I'd expect to be good again next week. So I think Aaron Jones' salary was a decent amount too high this week at 78. But I think that 78 would actually be an appropriate number for him this week. My concern is that he may have gone up because he did well. So I'll say 78 for Aaron Jones. What about you?
I would have probably, again, I think 78 was a little high for me. Again, I think I'm higher on him, so I have to kind of adjust for that. I already saw, because I was going to try to tell you that you were close, but it's 77, okay. And I think I probably would have said around 76. Personally, I don't think his salary should have gone down, but I kind of do think his salary should have gone down from where it was anyway. So
it was too high to begin with. So even though we were adjusting up, it's okay that his salary is lower than it was.
Yeah.
For Dalvin, so he had that contract situation and he was like kind of practicing, but it was kind of like the DeAndre Hopkins situation where it was like a hold in. So I would expect his role to expand. So I'm not going to change my thoughts on Dalvin Cook at all. I still think he's worth a decently high salary, and I think that he's a good play for next week. I would say he's closer to 85 than 87, but that's kind of nitpicky.
Yeah, he went up to 88. I'm still going to use him. Like I'll still roster him at that.
For sure. How about this? Clyde Edwards-Helaire at home against the Chargers, straight up, versus Dalvin Cook on the road against the Colts.
Edwards-Helaire.
I agree. Let's move on to Miami at New England. Cam Newton debuted. Mixed bag here. He was awesome from a fantasy perspective. He ran 15 times and scored twice, which is elite. But he threw the ball just 19 times. He lost 2.51 expected points on his 21 dropbacks with a 5.3 yard average depth of target. So I think that if you're looking for like a parallel, Cam Newton is Josh Allen. I know we always compare Josh Allen to Cam Newton, but in this case, it's the other way around. Cam is what Josh Allen was last year, where the passing volume may be low, but he's going to run, and he's probably going to run in high leverage situations. So Cam himself is going to have upside, but the upside of the other pieces in this offense may be limited if the offense isn't going to be super efficient and isn't going to throw that much. So I like Cam from a fantasy perspective. That was good, but the rest of the offense is concerning. Now, because Cam's passing was so limited, none of the pass catchers really blossomed, but Julian Edelman and N'Keal Harry are the two top guys here. Edelman had 7 targets. He had the lone deep look, and he had 1 in the red zone. Harry had 6 targets overall with 1 in the red zone. If they get in a situation where they have to pass more, those guys will be in play, but it seems like the Patriots want to run the ball when they can control it. That would be a good thing for the running backs, but they're a hot mess. Nobody played more than 30% of the snaps. Sonny Michel, Rex Burkhead, and James White all played exactly 29.7% of the snaps. It's like Bill Belichick is just staring directly into the camera and giving us the middle finger. I'm not using any of them. J.J. Taylor played 14%. I don't want to analyze this team more because that sucks. I'm not touching any of their backs. Edelman is in play. Harry's in play if they throw more. I guess same thing for Edelman. Cam himself is the new Josh Allen. The Dolphins were not good, but we may have a new name to monitor there because Myles Gaskin had an interesting day. He had 9 carries and 4 targets with 63% of the snaps. He lined up in the slot for 3 snaps. He was out wide on 1. We did see Matt Breida and Jordan Howard mix in, and it was Howard who got a short touchdown, but Gaskin is worth monitoring. I'm not using him in DFS yet, but he's on my radar, and I did not expect that. So Myles Gaskin, very interesting. Devontae Parker hurt his hamstring and was held just 23 snaps. Not entirely clear what his outlook is. It led to Preston Williams and Mike Gesicki controlling the passing game. Williams had 7 targets and 2 deep. Gesicki had 5 total and 3 deep. They'd likely have a pretty concentrated target tree if Parker were to miss time, even with Fitzpatrick struggling. So we'll have to monitor that. But I think the Dolphins, definitely really interesting. just because we probably know where the ball is going. I want to talk to you about Cam, Brandon. Are you in the same boat where you're kind of viewing him similar to what we had with Josh Allen last year?
Yeah, maybe. That is to say, I'm not. I know there were a lot of. I saw a lot of tweets about how Cam Newton was like a late round fantasy pick, and I get it. Probably shouldn't have been, but also it's hard to make the case that Cam was in a much better spot joining a new team than a lot of other quarterbacks. But anytime a quarterback doesn't throw a lot and throws downfield one time in a game, no matter how many pass attempts you have, if you only have one downfield attempt, I'm going to be nervous. And
yeah,
you can't play this game, but if Cam didn't score those 2 rushing touchdowns, we'd be looking at this game a lot differently. So I'm going to play Cam. I don't think I have to stack him with any particular receiver because I don't think that any receiver is going to have. I think that the 100-yard, 2 touchdown games from the pass catchers here are going to be very, very few and far between. So I can probably just play Cam naked, not going to touch the running backs. So that's kind of where I am.
I think next week they may have to throw more, but it's not on the main slate. If Russ is going to cook, that means other teams are going to have to throw to catch up. That could help Edelman and N'Keal Harry, but I agree. I think that another way to view Cam might be 2018 Lamar Jackson, where he ran a bunch but never threw that much. That could be another parallel for Cam. Super high floor, the ceiling more muted because of the lack of pass attempts. So I think that's another way to view Cam going forward. There is another 2-game NFL slate coming up tonight, and FanDuel has another $1 million contest to celebrate. For just $9, get yourself entered into the FanDuel Monday Million with $1 million in total prizes, including $200,000 going to first place. Lock is at 7:15 p.m. Eastern tonight, so head on over to FanDuel.com or get yourself entered. Rules and eligibility restrictions apply. Let's move into the best game of the week, obviously, because we got to see Teddy Bridgewater airing it out, Brandon. Doesn't matter whether he won or not. Teddy is back. Josh Jacobs going nuts, getting targets. What a fun game.
Yeah, Jacobs was a big surprise. I know Carolina's rush defense last year was a pristine matchup, but Jacobs, I'm more interested in the targets. But 25 carries, 6 targets, which is 37 adjusted opportunities, which is pretty nuts. Scored 3 times, which again is awesome, but it's the workload for me that's really encouraging. One of his targets was actually downfield, which is pretty wild. Jacobs played 78% of the snaps, which is a career best for him. This is usage unlike what we came to see and expect from Jacobs in 2019. So for me, arrows up on Josh Jacobs. Derek Carr threw just 30 times, but 5 of those were downfield. That's not bad. Just not a ton of value from the Raiders passing game. Target leaders were 8 for Darren Waller, 6 for Jacobs, 5 for Henry Ruggs, 3 for Devontae Booker, 2 for Hunter Renfrow, 1 for Jason Witten, Nelson Aguilar, Bryan Edwards, and Jalen Richard. Aguilar, of course, had the lone touchdown to screw things up. Ruggs played 42 snaps, which is 67%. He did leave mid-game with an ankle injury, came back. 3 of his 5 targets were downfield. He lined up in the backfield on 2 snaps, had 2 rushes. Manufactured touches mean they want to get him involved in the offense. Derek Carr doesn't throw downfield often, but he has been efficient when he does that. So I'm still interested in Ruggs so long as he's fully healthy. And again, he came back and played. So he was probably, maybe not 100%, but shouldn't miss any time. So I'm interested in Ruggs for sure. And then Darren Waller's target share of 29% is definitely top tier for pretty much any player, but especially for a tight end. So I was a little bit, if Darren Waller wasn't in this game that I liked a lot, I would have been hesitant and okay, just kind of waiting and seeing what the target share looked like. But I'm interested in that. I'll have a few touchdown concerns about Darren Waller if they're going to continue to lean on Josh Jacobs inside the 10. They host the Saints on Monday Night Football for week 2, so they will not be on the main slate. But for the Panthers, also a fun spot. Christian McCaffrey, 65 of 67 snaps, according to Pro Football Focus. So that's hard to hate for sure. 23 of 25 running back carries for McCaffrey, all 4 running back targets. It's Christian McCaffrey. It's super hard to fade a player who sees 90%, 95, 100% of the snaps because he's the only one who does it. Teddy Bridgewater was credited for 9 downfield attempts, according to numberFire, on 34 passes. That's a deep attempt rate that would have led the league among qualified passers in 2019, which probably won't stick. A lot of his passes were between like 16 and 20 yards, which we qualify as deep targets. I know not every site does, but again, I'm okay with that. 8.2 yard average target depth, which would have been kind of middling, a little bit better than middling for qualified passers, but a huge deviation from what we saw from Teddy last year in a completely different offense when he had a league low downfield attempt rate. So arrows up on Teddy for me. His target distribution also helps. 9 for DJ Moore, 8 for Curtis Samuel and Robby Anderson. Moore and Samuel each had 3 deep looks. Anderson had 2. The snaps were 87% for Moore, 82% for Anderson, and 75% for Curtis Samuel. So I will rank them as such moving forward. I think it'll take a special game situation for me to want to get to Robby Anderson or Curtis Samuel just because I like DJ Moore so much. I'm most interested in Moore for sure. He nearly scored on a late slant from inside the 5, which is usage I like to see. Maybe I'm too low on Robby Anderson, but I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I would assume DJ Moore separates a little bit throughout the season. They're at the Bucs in week 2. That's a team that just let Alvin Kamara score like 100 times. So Christian McCaffrey's probably worth any salary. So my bigger question is, like, what are you thinking for these receivers specifically as it pertains to DJ Moore?
I think I'm higher on Anderson than you are, and it's not because I view DJ Moore lesser. I just think I like this offense a lot because they're going to throw a lot. And we saw Teddy, his ADOT went up 2 yards from last year, which is significant. I know it's because he was an outlier last year and like how bad or how low it was, but I would say both Anderson and Moore are viable standalone plays. So if I were to name that salary for Robby Anderson, I think he's like a $6,000, $6,100 type play. Are you lower than that?
I think I'd put him in the high 9s, just because.
Like high 50, like 59?
Yeah, which is what he is.
Oh, okay.
I don't like Curtis Samuel. Seemed like he might not be as involved this year, just based on the few reports that I have seen. Although people said Curtis Samuel was better than DJ Moore last year, so like it's really hard to gauge that situation. I think if Samuel is more involved, it's going to come at the expense of targets to Robby Anderson, I think, because DJ Moore, again, I think will separate more than just a 1-target lead on these two guys. But
yeah,
I mean, I'm fine with both. I know I said I probably won't play Anderson too much, but if he is, in that upper 5,000 range, that's going to be about where he should be. So maybe I was a little initially too low on Anderson, but I still love DJ Moore for sure. Yeah,
DJ Moore, I would say status quo for him, slight up for Anderson. I stacked this game like every way you can imagine, still did not get to Curtis Samuel. And I'm not going to change on that. So I'm pretty much status quo across the board. Really encouraged with this offense. It's a lot tougher matchup next week, but pretty excited for that game too. This week 2 is going to be fun. I'm excited for that. Let's move now to Philadelphia at Washington. This game was a certified poop show for the Eagles. There are 2 separate takeaways from this game. The first is that the offensive line will be an issue if Lane Johnson doesn't come back. I would guess that Johnson is back next week because he had a chance to play on Sunday, but if he's not, I would downgrade the entire offense. The second is that Washington's defensive line is as good as advertised. The secondary can be beaten, so I think it's a situation where pass catchers are in play against them, but running backs and quarterbacks should be downgraded a pretty fair amount. There was no Miles Sanders here, so Boston Scott got good usage. He played 38 snaps compared to Corey Clement's 25, despite missing some time due to injury. Scott had 9 carries and 2 targets. I will be looking to buy low on Scott if Sanders misses more time, although it seems pretty likely he's back for next week. We can feel good about the pass catchers here because we know who's going to get volume and what kind of volume they're going to get. Dallas Goedert was a big star. He led with 9 targets. Zach Ertz had 7. The 2 are basically even in both snaps and routes too. So for now, I'm going to favor the lower salaried guy, and the presence of one does not impact the appeal of the other. They play at the same time enough for me for that not to matter. So I just think that they're independent of each other. The deep balls were all to Deshaun Jackson and Jalen Reagor. Djax had 7 overall targets. Rager had 4. Only one of their combined 11 targets were within 15 yards of the line of scrimmage. They're going to be super volatile, but they're going to have tons of upside too. They will be elite tournament plays as long as they are healthy and the offensive line is healthy. Deshaun Jackson kept getting I don't know. He was laying down on the field at one point getting checked out by trainers. Then he tweeted, I wasn't hurt, which is kind of weird. So why we're laying down and getting checked out, I don't know. Maybe his snap rate will be bad, but I don't know. It's a weird situation. I feel really good about Goddard, and I'm going to ask you about him in just a second. The Washington backfield was a committee, and it wasn't one that favored Antonio Gibson. Gibson played just 26% of the snaps. J.D. McKissic was at 46%. Peyton Barber played 40%. Barber also had 6 rush attempts inside the 5-yard line. Gibson had 1. McKissic had none. Barber's 17 carries resulted in 29 yards, the most Peyton Barber stat line one could possibly concoct. He had no targets, so it's possible his role eventually gets reduced, but this is a full-blown committee I would avoid until Gibson's snap rate rises. Dwayne Haskins wasn't that different from last year. 0.01 passing net expected points per dropback. That is below average. I'm not really digging this offense yet. The one interesting piece here outside of Terry McLaurin, maybe Logan Thomas. Thomas had 8 total targets. 1 was deep. He had a red zone tutty. He led the team with 72 air yards. That is more than enough to be relevant at tight end. McLaurin had 7 targets, 1 deep, 1 in the red zone. I'm still lower on McLaurin than consensus, but he's fine. I just think that Thomas was the bigger usage winner on the team. And these two are currently the only 2 usable players on the team, at least to me. I want to talk to you about Dallas Goedert, Brandon, because I'm pretty much in on his usage since the midway through last year. Are you as high on Goddard as I am?
Maybe not quite as high, but I am high on him.
Okay.
We talked about this last year, and it seems like a lot of people are down on Zach Ertz, which I don't fully understand. I know he kind of plays above expectation a lot.
Is that a subtweet? Is that a subtweet at me?
Well,
on my own podcast while I sit right here?
I remember specifically talking about Dallas Goedert being involved last season, and it didn't really matter for Zach Ertz because they were both Zach Ertz independently was still good in terms of snaps and targets for a tight end. So this is the rare exception where 2 tight ends can kind of be relevant on the same offense. Usually if there are 2 tight ends for DFS, there are none. This is not that situation. Goddard, again, 79% of the snaps. The highest snap rate for a receiver was Jalen Rager at 59%. I know health is probably has a lot to do with that, but basically what that means is Goddard was the second pass catcher in terms of snap rate. So I'm high on Goddard. I don't know what the salary is going to be. I would probably go up to about 58, 59 for Goddard. I would assume Zach Ertz is he was 66, I think, in week 1. He'll probably stay about the same, but what would you pay for Goddard?
I think Ertz is right at 66. That, if I didn't look, but I think that would be the right salary for Goddard. I would say 6,000. So we're pretty much on the same level there. It's another game that I like. Man, this week 2 slate's going to be bonkers.
His salary is 55.
Okay.
And Ertz is 63.
Goddard's a cash game play at that number, but Ertz is also lower than he should be. So I will probably just use both, honestly. Not in the same lineup, obviously, but I think their salaries are lower than they should be, right?
I think so. Deshaun's 55, Rager's 51.
So we're just going to stack the entire Eagles offense and see what happens.
After Carson Wentz had 0.1 seconds to throw, and when he did have time to throw, wasn't.
I'm operating on Monday under the assumption that Lane Johnson will play, which will be a major upgrade. Miles Sanders at 68. If he gets in a full practice by Friday, I could get behind that. I know they were talking about limiting him initially, but he's a further week removed from the injury, so maybe they wouldn't need to limit him as much. I don't know. Regardless, I'm in on the Eagles. I know it looked bad, but their salaries are lower than they should be against a defense, despite looking good on Sunday night, a defense I want to exploit. So I think that I'll be very in on the Eagles, maybe not in on Wentz, but yeah, I'll probably be in on Wentz too, whatever. Anyway, let's move on to Cleveland at Baltimore. We talked about the Chiefs being back. The Ravens right there too. What'd you see in this one, Brandon?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm going to go through some stuff. I could probably zoom through it because the Ravens are the Ravens. Lamar was 20 of 25 for 275 and 3 touchdowns. Was 5 of 6 on downfield throws. He ran 7 times for 45 yards. It's really hard to dislike Lamar Jackson if he's going to play the same way he did last year. I know the touchdown rates and everything we have to figure will normalize, but maybe he's regression proof. He's not, but he is just an elite fantasy asset with that rushing. I saw pretty much exactly what I would have expected to see if I knew Lamar Jackson threw 25 times, and that would be 6 targets for Mark Andrews and for Marquise Brown. They should lead in targets every week, but they may only get half a dozen when the team, even if the team scores a lot. Andrews scored twice, had 4 red zone targets to tie for the league lead through week 1. Brown had 101 yards. I'm not saying like they were empty targets. I'm not trying to downplay them at all, but there weren't a ton of them. That's very possible for these guys. And, a few inches means, Marquise Brown might get 3 catches on 6 targets or 100 yards plus. So it's always difficult to go super hard at Marquise Brown for me. Next up in targets were Miles Boykin and Willie Snead with 4 each. Brown played 63% of the snaps. Boykin was at 68%, Snead at 66%. Still just a little bit worried about Brown in terms of cash game territory. I don't think I'll ever really get there, just based on the volume. The backfield here, Mark Ingram led with 10 rushes. J.K. Dobbins had 7, which is the same as Lamar. Gus Edwards had 4. The snaps, 36% for Ingram, 39% for Dobbins, 25% for Edwards. Really hate that. So even in an offense this good, I can't really get behind playing any Ravens running back. So I'm going to treat them the same way as I did last year. Love Lamar, and if I'm going to play Lamar, I have to consider only Mark Andrews and Marquise Brown. They're at the Texans next week, so I'll be playing them. For the Browns, kind of a tough scene. They are, for me, mercifully on the Thursday game slate against the Bengals, so I don't have to chase them on the main slate. Baker Mayfield, not an easy matchup, but pretty terrible passing metrics. A bright spot is that Odell Beckham had 10 targets, which was 29% of the team's looks, and 129 air yards, which was 40%. But the downside there is that he caught 3 of them for 22 yards. So that feels pretty bad. I think in terms of the data that I've seen, it's possibly one of the worst receiving lines I can remember for how empty it was. He had 1 of his 3 catches actually increased expected scoring. I don't actually know the league average, but it's like 90% because it's really hard for a receiver to catch a pass and not kind of move. So it was just, again, tough scene for Odell. Jarvis Landry, Kareem Hunt each had 6 targets. Jarvis Landry had 61 yards. Kareem Hunt had 9. Beckham, 75% of snaps. Landry, 71%. I'm not saying they're dead, but I'm glad they're not on the main slate. I can get another week to see if I can believe in the Browns or treat them more as I did last year. Backfield's pretty messy. Nick Chubb failed to hit a 50% snap rate. He was at 48%, had a 10 carry, 1 target day. By contrast, Kareem Hunt played 49% of the snaps, 13 carries, and those 6 targets. So in terms of adjusted opportunities, that's a gap of 25 to 12 in favor of Hunt. You're going to have to hit the right game script whenever these teams play to figure out the backfield. But even then, it's going to be a split backfield. If it's a Kareem Hunt week, Chubb can still score. So I don't really like any of the Browns. I don't know. What I guess I feel like it's kind of status quo for both teams. Do you have any real takeaways here?
Bump up the Ravens defense, I think. You could bump down the Browns offense. That's fair. But given what the Ravens added defensively this year, they could be disgusting. So I think that's kind of where I'm at. I think with Marquise Brown, you were talking about him never being a cash game play. I think that's the correct take. But that does not exclude him from being a high quality tournament play. Yeah. If there's a situation where you assume the other team scores, which may be tough against his defense, if you give me 10 targets of Marquise Brown, not even 10, let's say 8 targets of Marquise Brown. Let's say Houston gets out to a 14-0 lead and the Ravens reluctantly have to throw. We know Lamar's going to be efficient on those pass attempts. So like I would say, although he is not a cash game consideration, which again I agree with you on, although he's not a cash game consideration, he is a high quality tournament play, which I would give a salary of $6,000. What about you?
That was the number I had in mind. The volume is just not there. The downfield work makes him really volatile. So he's going to be one of those guys who either overperforms or just underperforms with no real. I don't really see a floor for Marquise Brown.
Yeah, that's true for most receivers, but I think that you have to be okay with a lack of a floor if you want some upside in tournaments.
Yeah,
like unless you're rolling out Danny Amendola.
Yeah,
and I don't want to roll out Danny Amendola, so. I'm okay. I'm okay with risky receivers if I know they have a path to a ceiling, and I know that Brown has that. Let's move here to the Colts at the Jaguars, and the Colts lost this game, which is not great. It seems like they've likely lost Marlon Mack too. He left the game with what is feared to be a torn Achilles. Normally, you'd assume that would lead to a workhorse role for Jonathan Taylor, but Nyheim Hines heavily involved. He was actually the lead back here. He had 7 carries and 8 targets. Hines had 2 of 3 carries inside the 10, and he added 1 target inside the 10. Taylor had the other carry inside the 10, 9 carries and 6 targets. The passing down work was good, just wasn't as good as Nyheim Hines. Hines played 53% of the snaps. Taylor played 35%. So Nyheim Hines is a problem, and this is not going to be a one-man show with Marlon Mack being out. I am still interested, though, in getting Taylor despite this. He finished with 21 adjusted opportunities, which is a decent number, and we know he has talent. So this is a tough one to dissect. I'm going to ask you about Taylor at the end, but I'm not writing off Jonathan Taylor just because Hines was involved here. We can make jokes about Phillip Rivers because of his predictable Rivers picks, but he wasn't like hideous, I guess. He averaged 0.25 passing net expected points per dropback. The bigger problem was that he wasn't aggressive. His 8 out with 6.3 yards. He had a 10.9% deep rate. And if that stays the case, the Colts do tend to play things differently at home than on the road, so that may not stay the case, but it would put a lid on the offense's upside. It does not help that this came against a defense lacking in talent. So concern there for sure, but maybe not for the same reason people were discussing on Twitter, because I like to dunk on Phillip Rivers throwing picks. The target totals looked fine, but that's in part because the Colts threw 46 times. T.Y. Hilton had 9 targets and 2 downfield targets. Paris Campbell had 9 total targets. 3 of those were deep. Neither guy hit a 20% market share, though, because of how often they threw. So I would say it's a downgrade for Hilton if Campbell's going to be involved. Campbell becomes interesting if the salary is low enough, and I would guess that it probably would be. We just have to hope they throw a bunch if their target numbers are going to be under 20%. So arrows up on Paris Campbell, arrows down on T.Y. Hilton. I have been skeptical of Gardner Minshew, and he played well on Sunday. Just not fully sold yet. Minshew completed all but 1 pass and had 0.43 passing net expected points per dropback. That is awesome. But he threw just 1 deep pass and had a 4.4 average depth of target. They also threw just 20 times, which is not super encouraging. So Minshew played well. Kudos to him. But I'm not going to go all in as a result of this game. The target distribution was also wild. Keelan Cole led with 5 targets. Laviska Shenault had 4. DJ Chark had just 3. If they're going to spread out the targets and limit the throws, it's going to be really tough for me to go here. Chark played 83% of the snaps. Cole played 70%. Shenault played 62%. So this is a tough team to feel good about the passing offense, even after a good performance. The backfield's a bit more clear. James Robinson had 16 carries and 1 target while playing 68% of the snaps. It was a positive script, so we could see it skew more towards Chris Thompson in a different situation. But Robinson's the lead back here. I just don't know how much that's worth in a really mediocre offense. He's not going to get targets either, so he's the lead back, and that's good for season long, just not a great situation for daily fantasy. Brandon, talk to me about Jonathan Taylor. We saw Nyheim Hines get involved in high-leverage situations. That's bad, but Taylor is talented. He's running behind an elite offensive lineman healthy, and he did get work in the passing game. So name that salary for Jonathan Taylor in week 2 against the Vikings.
Yeah, so based on what I saw from the Colts, I don't feel super confident going into that matchup. But we know how good Taylor is. And Taylor is going to be, and he was really shaping out to be someone who we needed to sort of buy before the boom. I Don't know if we'll get that with Marlon Mack. Probably out for the season. But in terms of salary for that game specifically, going based off the fact that Kenyon Drake had a salary of $6,600 for week 1, I'd have a hard time putting Taylor above like 62. But I'm going to play Jonathan Taylor unless he is probably like 66 or above.
Yeah, I was thinking around 62 as well. I think that's a really good number for him. He's 58, so okay. I think that he's not a cash game play. No. I think that's fairly obvious. However, I think like if you play the assumption game and you assume that Jonathan Taylor gets more carries in what could be more of a neutral script and takes more of the work from Nyheim Hines, if he's going to get that much of a receiving workload,
yeah. And we talked about, on the podcast, not to target running backs who don't play a lot of snaps, but the 35% snap rate is going to increase.
Oh, yes. Like, he's a rookie in week 1, and Marlon Mack is likely out of the picture. So I would say Jonathan Taylor, not a cash game play, but a really good tournament option. I would get wary if he were to be popular. Like, that would be a sticky situation, but I'm hoping the Nyheim Hines thing will scare people away there so we can get in on some Jonathan Taylor. Let's move now to the afternoon games, talking about the Chargers at the Bengals. This game sucked, Brandon. Tell me what was good from it, if there was anything.
Well, we learned a lot about the quarterback situation because each team has a new quarterback, so there's that. But just 29 combined points, and the Chargers won because Randy Bullock hurt himself on a game-tying chip shot, which feels like a Bengals thing. Feels like a Browns thing, of course, but it feels like a Bengals thing as well.
It's an Ohio thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like I don't ever like to joke about injuries, but
yeah.
Anyway, it's Tyrod Taylor.
Tyrod.
Because he I feel like he went back and forth on that.
His mom and his dad call him different names. So
okay, so I'm gonna go with Tyrod.
Tyrod, yes.
Because I believe that is his wish. But Tyrod Taylor, 16 of 30 for 208 yards, no touchdowns. League average per play passing efficiency, which is just a one-game sample. But, I mean, that kind of gives me some context for what he actually did on those attempts. 9 of his passes were at least 16 yards downfield, which is 30%, which is nuts. And his ADOT was 11.2, which is pretty gnarly. So I like that. And I also like that his targets were very concentrated. 9 of them went to Mike Williams, 8 to Keenan Allen and Hunter Henry, and nobody else had more than 2. Those 3, again, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, and Hunter Henry, had all 9 of the downfield targets. Henry had 2 red zone targets. Williams and Allen each had 1. So all of the red zone work, all of the downfield work went to those 3 guys. So I like that. All those guys had at least a 27% target share, I should say. Williams was at 147 air yards, 45% of the air yards. That was the 5th most raw air yards through Sunday Night Football. Keenan Allen was at an 11-yard average target depth, which was up a yard from last year. I like that. I'm kind of in on this pass game, even though the touchdowns weren't there, the yardage wasn't really there. I just love the usage being concentrated in that manner. Austin Eckler, another tough scene here, I think. Just kind of depends what you expected from Austin Eckler. If you were high on Austin Eckler, you need to be lower on Austin Eckler. If you were not quite as high as everyone else, I still think that you can view it that way because he had 1 target. I'll phrase it as I took the notes because he played 50 snaps, 6 of which were as a wide receiver. So he played 68% of the snaps, which is a pretty solid rate for any back. If we're just being transparent there. 19 carries, which was a team high, 3 red zone carries, and he had all of the red zone or all of the running back targets. But on the flip side of that, Joshua Kelly had 12 carries and 4 red zone carries. Eckler, I did say, had all the running back targets, but that was only 1. So, yeah, we want Eckler to have a lot more receiving. I don't think 1 target is the expectation for Eckler. And I'm just definitely not going to completely write off somebody with a 68% snap rate for an offense that I don't completely hate for a running back who can get targets in bunches. if that's, the way that it works. And they host the Chiefs next week. Passing volume is probably going to have to be up. So again, you have to be lower on Eckler if you were really high on him entering the season. But if you're more like me and you were kind of like lukewarm on Eckler, treating him more as like a season-long RB2, I think it's fine because the snap rate was there. And I'm not that concerned about Joshua Kelly because, again, Eckler was involved in the red zone. So we'll talk about him more later. For the Bengals, Joe Burrow's debut had some highlights and some lowlights. He was 23 of 36, 193 yards, no touchdowns, one pick. The passing efficiency based on numberFire's metrics was pretty bad. Took 3 sacks, threw deep just 5 times, but an average target depth of 8.1 yards. So kind of middling there. In this, maybe AJ Green is back. Maybe we learned that. He had 3 of the 5 deep targets, 9 of the 36 targets overall for a 26% target share, 45% of the air yards. Outside of Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, CJ Uzomah, and Giovanni Bernard each had 5 targets, with the red zone looks going to Uzomah and Bernard. So that's a little tough, but perhaps AJ Green is going to get wide receiver 1 treatment. I don't have the data on this, but you would have to assume that Tyler Boyd dealt a lot with Chris Harris in the slot. I would expect Tyler Boyd to increase his target share for sure moving forward. And for Joe Mixon, he had 19 carries, 2 targets, no red zone work on a team that had just 4 plays in the red zone. 59% snap rate for Mixon, which is a little bit worrisome because the game was close throughout. Bernard played 29% of the snaps, so definitely Mixon has a huge edge there. I'm a little bit lower on Mixon, I think, than I was, not substantially so. But because the Bengals are not on the main slate, I want to go back to the Chargers and ask you specifically about Austin Eckler and what your thoughts are.
I think that he's a good illustration of how terrible the stat touches is, because Eckler had 20 touches, but 19 carries and 1 target is a lot different than like 12 carries and 8 catches. Like it's just a terrible stat, and you should never use it to talk about anything. I would agree that you have to lower him a bit. I also agree with you that 1 target is no longer the expectation. So is not the expectation going forward. So I would say, like last year in the games he played when Justin Jackson was healthy and Melvin Gordon was out, and Jackson got hurt again on Sunday, which stinks, but there's Kelly's, he's kind of like the same thing. I just want my boy Justin to be healthy. Eckler last year in those games had 26 adjusted opportunities per game. I'm probably going to expect him more to be in the 23, 24 type range. Is that fair going forward?
Yeah, probably, I would say.
Okay, so 23 to 24 adjusted opportunities is like, that's more Kenyon Drake than Austin Eckler, like from a salary perspective. So I would say if I'm naming that salary, it's like 72. What do you think?
I was going to say 7,000.
Okay. Cool.
He is 69.
Nice. Oh, wow. Really? Huh.
Yeah. Which I think is...
I was not expecting to be higher on him than the actual number.
Well, he was, 77 this week? And we talked on our snake draft. What's that?
I thought he was... Yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry. You were right. I was stupid. You're always right.
Well, I drafted him in our 3-man snake draft.
Who won that, by the way?
I believe Jim did, whoever that is.
Right.
But I liked the expected opportunity. I didn't really love the salary last week. Dropping down $800 is very significant. So I think Eckler will probably be overlooked a lot in a game where, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets like 8 targets next week because the Chargers are getting like trounced. So in season long, I had Eckler and Aaron Jones in the same tier. I would not put them in the same tier if I were re-ranking right now. Would Correct.
You agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But $6,900 is low enough where I will buy back in. That's what I would say. Let's go to Tampa Bay at New Orleans. Tom Brady struggled at times in his Tampa Bay debut. Threw 2 picks, one of which was a pick 6, and he lost 5.63 passing net expected points. It's worth noting that number is disproportionately impacted by the pick 6, so take that with a grain of salt. He did throw deep 19.4% of the time. That's up from 16.2% last year. ADOT was roughly the same. So I would say like Teddy Bridgewater radically changed in going to Carolina. Tom Brady roughly the same with better weapons. And Mike Evans was not at full health too. So I'm keeping things relatively even on Brady and this offense, assuming Evans is healthier for next week. Chris Godwin led with 7 targets. Mike Evans had 4 while playing with that injury and dealing with Marshawn Lattimore. Scotty Miller, decent role. He was tied for second with 6 targets, ran around on 35 of 46 pass plays. O.J. Howard had 6 targets, but it came on just 22 routes. When Evans is healthier, I will bet that Miller's role goes back down a bit because he actually played outside a lot. Like I think he had 6 slot routes, according to PFF. But the tight end situation is a mess. Gronk also ran just 24 routes and was blocking a lot. So I think that like if I'm ranking the options here, Godwin is obviously 1, Evans obviously 2. Miller might be 3rd above the tight ends, even though I'm not super sold on him. It's just like I think it's just kind of use the studs here. Even with Leonard Fournette in town, Ronald Jones had a good role. 17 carries, 3 targets for him on 47% of the snaps. The snap rate wasn't good, but it was pretty clear that Jones was the lead back. And he didn't look that bad either. Fournette played 9 snaps. LaShawn McCoy played 25, but he was kind of just on the field, didn't get a lot of volume. So I'm not going at anybody here. Like you could go at Jones. He would be in play if they were big favorites. And they could be against Carolina next week. So like if you want to chase the matchup, do so with Ronald Jones over Leonard Fournette, but like there's a lot of risk there still. Drew Brees got the job done. Just wasn't all that exciting. His ADOT was 4.6. That's actually somehow lower than last year. Taysom Hill had 20% of their deep throws on the day. That's fun because I had 5. He had 1. So the old issues are still there. Might be even more apparent. You need some things to break right to get a ceiling game here. Brees was semi-concerning. I'll just put that. Ceiling's not an issue for Alvin Kamara. He scored twice, maybe 3 times. I don't know. He scored multiple times. He finished with 12 carries and 8 targets, which is 28 adjusted opportunities. Played 66% of the snaps. Latavius Murray had 15 carries and 1 target on 34% of the snaps. Kamara, I would say, is basically what he was before the injury last year, and that is a very, very good thing for daily fantasy. So Alvin Kamara, feeling pretty good about him after week 1. The Buccaneers kept Michael Thomas in check, which allowed Jared Cook to pop up. He had 7 targets, which was second on the team behind Kamara. 2 of those were deep. Emmanuel Sanders had 5 targets with 4 in the red zone, but none deep. Obviously, Kamara and Thomas are the top 2 guys here, but if Brees is going to dink and dunk, it's harder to get the tertiary pieces to emerge. But I would go Cook next, and then Mannion on the targets here. The complicating issue is that Thomas got rolled up on late in the game. Murray went down and then rolled up on the backside of Thomas, like his ankle. He apparently wasn't letting trainers look at him last night. That could mean he's fine, but it definitely means we don't really know what the prognosis is. So losing Thomas would put a big dent in the entire offense. It would let us get a little bit more excited about Manny and Cook, but overall it would hurt Brees and Kamara and probably hurt everyone from a net perspective. So keep an eye on Michael Thomas. Just don't really know what that situation is going to be. Brandon, what were your first impressions of this Buccaneers offense with Tom Brady at the helm?
It's super tough because Mike Evans wasn't 100%. But I can start in the backfield and say I have no interest in anybody on FanDuel. Season long is a different story, but I don't feel like I have to roster Ronald Jones, so I probably won't unless the script is absolutely perfect. The tight ends, not really interested. And the problem with the receivers is they are justifiably high salaried. So even with any sort of worry, their prices never really go down enough. So I don't think we'll ever get to sort of buy low on Godwin or Evans. I don't know their salaries, but I can guarantee you they're never going to get close to like 7,000 no matter what happens. So now I have to pay probably like 75. I should have looked this up, but for Mike Evans.
Well, I want to ask you about Jones really quick because he's $5,900, and I think people are obsessed with matchups at running back, despite the fact that they matter not as much. Jones at 59 or Jonathan Taylor at 58?
Taylor.
I agree. Let's move to Arizona at San Francisco. Kyler Murray leading the comeback, running a lot. What'd you see in this one?
Yeah, 13 carries for Murray, 91 yards and a touchdown. Threw 40 times for just 230 yards. Matchup not fantastic, obviously, but the passing efficiency also not great. And just 4 deep attempts, which is something that kind of happened with Kyler Murray in and out last year, as apparently defenses shifted the way that they played against the Cardinals, trying to funnel things down and not really let anything go over the top. So I really am going to track that closely for 2020. But, DeAndre Hopkins got fed 16 targets, 14 catches, 151 yards. Nobody else had more than 5 targets. Larry Fitzgerald, Christian Kirk, and Chase Edmonds all had 5. That worked out to a 43% target share for Hopkins, 54% of the air yards, despite 103 air yards total on a 6.4 yard average target depth. But I was a little hesitant on Hopkins because historically receivers who change teams struggle and don't really live up to their preseason average draft cost, to give it some season long context. And with the holdout situation and the limited preseason, I thought it would take some time. But I guess if you throw 16 times to DeAndre Hopkins, good things are going to happen regardless if the chemistry is perfect. Interestingly, despite only 5 targets for Christian Kirk, he had 3 of the 4 downfield looks. Hopkins had the other. I always like Christian Kirk. He's going to be a lower salaried option for game stacks than DeAndre Hopkins. But for me, the arrow is way up on Hopkins from where I was, and I think he's probably going to change the fall off for receivers changing team if they just feed him like they did in week 1. Kenyon Drake played 71% of the snaps, had 16 carries, but only 2 targets. Chase Edmonds, again, had 5 targets, including a red zone look. It's a little odd, but Drake did have the only red zone carry among the running backs. So that's 20 adjusted opportunities. It's not bad. Played 70% of the snaps. Hopefully Drake is a more affordable back this season. That's always fun. Maybe I can play Kenyon Drake around 7,000 instead of Le'Veon Bell, like I did all of last year.
You can be your Le'Veon Bell.
They host Washington next week, which definitely not a great rushing matchup, but they are 6.5-point favorites. And then for the 49ers, the biggest bright spot was Raheem Mostert, who had 15 of 23 running back carries, 5 targets, 60% of the snaps. Mostert tore off a long touchdown reception, but wasn't really good on the ground analytically. Tevin Coleman played only 6 snaps, likely because of the air quality concerns and his sickle cell trait. Jerick McKinnon played 31% of the snaps. So even then, Mostert had a week 1 edge, but I think it's going to be tough to plug in Raheem Mostert in a DFS lineup with 2 viable backs behind him. I would expect the snap rate to go back down when Tevin Coleman is in a better spot to play more. Jimmy Garoppolo, pretty rough, 19 of 33. Did have 259 yards and 2 touchdowns, but if you take away a 76-yarder to Raheem Mostert, which I know is always not fair to do, but he would have been at 5.7 yards per attempt. And problematically, of the 32 targeted passes, nobody got more than 5. George Kittle, Raheem Mostert, Jerick McKinnon, Trent Taylor, and Kendrick Bourne all had 5 targets, with Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk inactive. Samuel's on IR for at least 2 more weeks, but I didn't see a whole lot to feel great. I'm still fine with George Kittle, obviously. Perhaps Brandon Ayuk can stand out next week against the Jets, but I don't really like the 49ers. I didn't really like them last year for DFS. Feel kind of the same way this year. But what are your thoughts on Kenyon Drake?
Yeah, I think it was a really good role. I expected a really good role. I think we talked about that on Thursday too. We liked the role a lot. It just wasn't a good match. But I think it's similar for next week. But we also get confirmation that he's going to have that role. 2 targets, not a huge number, but I think given the way Washington plays, they're probably going to throw quite a bit because I'm not sure you'll be able to run against that defensive line. So maybe quick passes to backs maybe in play. So I would say Drake is a 7,000-ish type player. I think that you were spot on there. I'd agree with that. As far as Raheem Mostert goes, because they're facing the Jets, I feel like he's going to be a big talking point this week. I also agree with your assessment that when Tevin Coleman's not playing in conditions that could literally kill him, his snap rate will probably go up. McKinnon playing as many snaps as he did is concerning. So I would guess that Mostert and Ronald Jones are probably going to be pretty popular in week 2. I am hesitant on both. I could see having exposure to them in tournaments, but I would try to be underweight relative to the field. Mostert still makes me nervous. I don't know if that's misguided on my part, though.
No, because I don't think he'll play 60% of the snaps next week. If he does, I will miss out. But I think I can feel better about a 60+% snap rate from other backs in that pricing range, specifically Kenyon Drake.
If you guarantee me that he would play 60% of the snaps and get 5 targets every game, I'd be all in.
Yes.
But you can't guarantee that, and I also don't expect that. So that's why I'm still very hesitant to buy him. Let's finish up here with the Sunday night game. Cowboys at the Rams. The dink and dunkish type offense the Rams finished 2019 with was back again on Sunday, where they were running a lot of play action, a lot of rollouts, a lot of screens. Jared Goff averaged just 4.5 air yards per attempt, which is very low. It helps keep the sacks down, but it also may put a bit of a lid on the offense from an upside perspective. Goff still threw for 275 yards, and it may change when they face lesser defensive lines, but Goff himself, tougher sell in that type of scheme from a fantasy perspective. Robert Woods is not. He also kept his big role from the stretch run, led the team with 8 targets. Nobody else had more than 5. Woods had 1 of the 2 deep targets. He had 1 in the red zone. They are scheming him touches. You love to see all that. This could be confirmation bias on my part, but I've never been a huge Cooper Kupp type guy. I had Woods higher than Kupp going into the year. This has kind of confirmed or solidified that for me, so I'm still higher on Robert Woods. Kupp, though, did play 85% of the snaps. Didn't seem like he lost time due to the potential for them to play more 12 personnel, but Woods is the top guy here. Tyler Higbee played 89% of the snaps and had 4 targets. He's still well ahead of Gerald Everett, who played just 33% of the snaps. Josh Reynolds and Van Jefferson split snaps for the third receiver spot, but Jefferson had 3 targets compared to Reynolds 1. I think all 3 of Woods, Kupp, and Higbee are in play in this offense, though I'd put Higbee a hair ahead of Kupp due to the salary. Jefferson ranks 4th for me. Just not in play yet, but he would be 4th, and the guy I'm monitoring most. Malcolm Brown actually had a really good role for the Rams and didn't look bad. Like, he's not explosive, but he looked decisive. 18 carries and 4 targets while playing 60% of the snaps. He had 3 carries inside the 10 compared to Cam Akers' 1. And Brown had both carries inside the 5-yard line. If we can get Malcolm Brown to keep getting passing down work along with the goal line stuff, he'll be a decently valuable daily fantasy player. So I'm saying stock up on Malcolm Brown right now. That may not stick because Cam Akers is talented, and his role works for season long for Akers, but with 14 carries and 1 target without the goal line work, he's not in play for DFS right now. I'm going to ask you about Malcolm Brown in a second. The Cowboys offense seemed to struggle, which surprised me given how bad I expected the Rams defense to be. It could be because Lyle Collins is on injured reserve and their depth on the offensive line is being tested, but it was a bit surprising. We may want to keep an eye on that, but I would guess things get better as we get deeper into the season, especially if Collins is able to come off IR in week 4. And that impacted Dak Prescott a lot. He had minus 1.25 passing net expected points. He ran 3 times for 30 yards. I'm still high on Dak, but it does seem like they were trying to get the ball out of his hands quickly, and Dak threw deep just 1 time. I would say it's a slight downgrade to this offense for the time being, but I was also crazy high on the offense. So a downgrade for them doesn't mean like too much. They're just not quite as high as I was on before. The positive for the Cowboys is that the studs got fed. Zeke Elliott had 22 carries and 4 targets. He converted one of those targets into a touchdown, also played 88% of the snaps. Zeke at times didn't get passing down work last year, but he was talked up as having a good role in training camp there. So it's arrows up on Zeke Elliott for me. The other guy to get fed was Amari Cooper. That was despite seeing Jalen Ramsey for a lot of that game. Cooper had 14 targets. Nobody else had more than 6. CeeDee Lamb had more targets than Michael Gallup and played 82% of the snaps. So I'd say arrows up on Cooper and Lamb. Gallup gets a slight downgrade, but it may not matter much because Blake Jarwin got banged up, and it sounds like he may have a torn ACL, and that could end the season. It would open up more targets for everyone. Dalton Schultz had 4 targets, but he's not as big of a threat to targets as the others. So Gallup may wind up being neutral just with the target tree potentially getting narrowed by one person here. But Brandon, I want to talk to Malcolm Brown. He got a lot of first-team reps in training camp, so I got some best ball shares as a result of that. I didn't expect him to play 60% of the snaps, get goal line work, and get passing down work, though. So name that salary from Malcolm Brown on the road against Philadelphia next week.
Yeah, so according to FanDuel Sportsbook, the Rams are 2.5-point underdogs. The total 48.5, and I'm trying to compare him a little bit to like Jonathan Taylor, where the Colts are 3-point home favorites, 47.5-point total. So, different in terms of being favored and being on the road, but similar totals. And we're hoping that Jonathan Taylor gets like the snap rate that Malcolm Brown had. I know talent-wise, it's a very huge gap, but opportunity matters. I kind of think around 58 as well. I think they should probably be around the same salary. Brown may be a little bit ahead.
I think that Brown is like a 6,000 type player for me, and that's where I put Taylor too. So I think that it's good to compare them. But Brown is $5,200.
Oh, okay.
So I think salaries might have been out before that game was over. So I don't think Brown's a cash game play. I will say that.
Yeah, I don't think it's an egregious price where it's like you just plug them in.
Right.
It's not like that.
I agree. I would say he's not a cash game play. I would say that he is a pretty high quality tournament play, though. If I'm grading him relative to Jonathan Taylor for week 2 specifically, because like season long, obviously it's Taylor. Like no brainer. But for week 2, I'd probably go Taylor, but it's by a very, 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 very slim margin.
Yeah, it's close. I think that's a good comparison. The savings for Brown will go, kind of a long way. It's basically, if nothing else, an upgrade at your defense. But again, we're hoping Taylor gets the snap rate that Brown had. So
where do you view these two relative to Raheem Mostert and Ronald Jones? I feel like they will be big talking points this week.
I'd still put Mostert first.
Okay.
Followed by, I guess, Jones.
Well, Jones is 59, so like
I thought he was. No, I'd go Mostert first. I don't really like Ronald Jones. I felt like I had to say Ronald Jones though. What is that? That probably says something about me.
I mean, it is a really good matchup, and he's at home. So
I think that's probably
working in his favor.
Yeah.
But the ranking of those 4 guys is going to be a pretty major discussion for this week. So
yeah, and that said, I mean, look at the top of the running back pool. We got Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Dalvin Cook, Ezekiel Elliott, Derrick Henry against the Jaguars, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Aaron Jones.
I think that, okay, so if we change this discussion, I think the running back whose salary is most – wow, Derrick Henry at home against Jacksonville. Yuck. Ooh. I mean, we're going to have to use him, and I hate that. But the running back whose salary deviates most from where I would expect it to be might be Clyde Edwards-Helaire still. So, like, he might be the first guy I lock in for cash games.
Yeah. So, I mean, I didn't really answer your question. I'd still put Mostert above these 3. And then it's just really hard to know.
Week 2's going to be fun.
Yeah.
like, that's a really good running back pool to choose from. We're going to have to narrow things down, which we will do on Thursday's show. So make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get that NFL podcast right as it is posted. That one will also be live on the FanDuel YouTube page at 10 a.m. Eastern. We'll have our snake draft once again on Friday at 3:30, and I'll win again. And then we'll also have a waiver wire Q&A with myself and JJ Zacharyson on Tuesday at 3:30 to get set for your season-long waivers. Brandon, any final takeaways for you before we close up shop?
I think it's good to overreact to situations where we learned a lot. Whenever everyone's healthy, and we got to see, for me, like Chris Conley's not going to be the wide receiver 2 in Jacksonville. Like I have to adjust.
He's not going to be the wide receiver 1 overall.
I mean, he might be, but Yeah, I think more seriously, there are some spots where like the Lions' target share is obviously not going to be indicative once Kenny Golladay is back, but I think we can also learn a lot about situations where everyone was healthy, and I think it's good to make adjustments based on what we saw in week 1.
I think you're gonna have to I don't personally rank players for individual weeks. I'm gonna have to do that this week because I feel like I'm gonna have to. Just need to have a firm grasp of how I feel with people. Yeah,
rank 4 running backs: Mostert, Jones, Taylor, and Brown.
Yeah, like that's what you have to do. Yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah. Did I ask you to do that? I did. Anyway. So I'm going to have to do that this week, and we'll talk more about it on Thursday as we get more information and know more about other players, so make sure you are tuned in then. That is all the time that we have for today. As mentioned, make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, and if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer from the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Hopefully week 1 went well for you. Hopefully the 2-game slate tonight goes well also. We'll talk to you once again on Thursday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast powered by numberFire.